Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ashe, I believe you joined Secretary Jewell out in Craig, Colorado to be able to see some of the species recovery efforts that are being made at the local, state level in regards to the Greater Sage Grouse. But we still have a lot of concern, particularly in the state of Colorado, in terms of helping to be able to truly achieve the goal. Your department, your efforts, the goal is to recover the sage grouse, right?
Correct.
What's the number? What is recovery for Colorado? And I understand we could have maybe different numbers, different regions, different types of environment that they have to have. Do you have numbers?
We don't have population numbers. What we're looking at the threats to the species and how we can address the threats to the species, the primary one being disturbance. And so we're working with the states, and we have all 11 states engaged in an effort with us in a conversation about how we can do that.
Can you understand the frustration when you say we don't have recovery numbers? How do we know when we win?
So first of all, with the sage grouse, it's not a listed species, so we would have never developed.
Anticipated. There's obviously a move this to a listing.
Right. So we don't have a recovery objective in terms of a population goal, and so what we're trying to do is really first of its kind with the Endangered Species Act is really work with the states to try to, which we did, to try to define the bar. We developed.
Will this prevent listing?
It can prevent a listing.
It can prevent listing.
Right.
On that. Now, when we're talking about working with the states, you've coupled Colorado in with 10 other states, an 11-state program for full recovery. You've just made a statement that we don't know what recovery really is because we haven't had targeted numbers in terms of what we need to be able to fill in. Mm-hmm. But if we had numbers and knew that we had recovery, let's take the scenario we have recovery in the state of Colorado, but not in the other 10 states. In the event of a listing, would Colorado still have to comply with the listing?
Well, in the event of a listing, and let's say Colorado, we could determine that Colorado had an adequate plan for conservation of the sage grouse, then we could recognize that with what we call a special rule under Section 4D of the Endangered Species Act, like we recently did with the lesser prairie chicken. We could say, all right, well, Colorado has an adequate plan for conservation, so as long as you are complying with Colorado's plan, then no need to come to the federal government for approval. So that's a possibility for us if we got to a situation where the total picture was, was such that we had to list the bird, but we had a state like Colorado or Wyoming or Idaho that had good, effective conservation plans in place.
And I understand you and I both do. We're dealing a little bit in hypotheticals because in our communities there is a real concern about the potential listing on it.
Sure.
What did you learn when you went to Colorado? Because I think it's always important not only to listen but to actually hear and to be able to see some of the positive results that were going on there. Would you concur that the efforts in Colorado that are being made are repopulating this species?
Yeah, we saw great people, landowners that are great stewards of the land and are working cooperatively with our people on the ground and with great support from the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so we've got in the state of Colorado, so I saw really the kind of partnership and cooperative approach that it takes to conserve a bird like the sage grouse, which is why I can be optimistic that we have the chance to get to a not warranted determination on the sage grouse, because we've got the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, the USDA, all 11 states working collaboratively on that effort. So it really is an unprecedented level of effort that's going on.
To be able to prevent it, do you have some concern because we continue to see litigation driving the issue? This is part of the court mandate that we are seeing coming down right now. You're spending a lot of resources right now in terms of litigation coming from extreme environmental groups coming in, when we've got a common attainable goal that, as you just noted, is being achieved actually by the states right now. If you had those same resources to actually help recover a species? Wouldn't that be a far better use of your dollars?
Certainly that litigation is a source of frustration for us, and it's not so much that people are taking us to court, it's the fact that oftentimes the result of that is less conservation or kind of a misdirection of our effort toward defending ourselves versus doing more conservation. And so I think I guess I would say certainly as director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I can be frustrated when people take me to court. But I'll also say it's not just coming from the environmental community. I get sued by the real estate development industry, by hunting groups, by states, by local governments, by tribes, and so there's a delicate balance there between people's right to challenge the work and the decisions of a federal agency like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the kind of orderly conduct of business. So there certainly is a friction there, and I'm not sure we're at the right place, and that certainly is something that would be ripe for consideration as we think about improvements to the Endangered Species Act and any of the laws that we implement.
Time of the gentleman has expired, and I was somewhat generous on the time, but I think it was important to hear total response. Director Ashe and Solicitor Thompson,